Stop scrolling. Because the whisper crawling across every timeline in the culture right now is that A$AP Rocky just offered to end the biggest Cold War in modern rap with his bare hands. No gloves. No referee. No pay-per-view. No promoter counting the gate. Just knuckles, skin, bone, and whatever is left of a friendship that died somewhere between a pandemic and a Grammy stage. And the reason the internet has completely lost its grip today is not simply that A$AP Rocky said it. It is how casually he said it. Like a man ordering coffee. Like a man who has already run the scenario in his head more than once and made peace with the ending. Baby, let me set the table for you properly, because there are two separate A$AP Rocky stories detonating at the exact same hour, and only one of them is the one everybody is arguing about. The second one is quieter, uglier, and honestly, it is the one that is going to cost somebody real money for the rest of their natural life. We are getting to that. Stay with me. Here's what dropped. A teaser surfaced for an upcoming sit-down between A$AP Rocky and Jason Lee, the full conversation scheduled to land in a matter of days. In that preview, Rocky gets asked whether he has been watching the celebrity boxing wave that has swallowed half of entertainment. He confirms he has. And then comes the question that changed the temperature of the entire week. Would he fight Drake bare knuckles, like the Irish? He does not stall. He does not deflect into a joke and change the subject the way a publicist would have coached him to. He essentially says yes, bare knuckle, like the Irish, and then adds the 6 words that turned this clip into a cultural grenade. You took that girl. And before the interviewer can even breathe, Rocky says no. I am going to tell you the story. I am going to tell you the story. Sit with that sentence for a second, because that sentence is the whole reason this preview has been replayed several million times in under 48 hours. He is not denying the beef. He is not managing the beef. He is announcing that there is a version of events the public has never heard, and that he is the one holding it. That is not a rapper doing press. That is a man opening a case file on camera and telling you the rest of the pages are coming Wednesday. Now, if you have been anywhere near this situation over the last several years, you already know that Rocky has addressed Drake before. Multiple times. And every single previous time, he kept it diplomatic. He kept it grown. The framework he offered the public went something like this. They were cool. Genuinely cool. He got with Rihanna, and they were still cool. Nobody was throwing chairs. Nobody was subtweeting. Then the world shut down. Everybody went indoors for 2 years. Some plans that were supposed to happen never happened. Some wires got crossed behind a curtain, and by the time everybody came back outside, the temperature had changed permanently. He has said, in his own words and in his own tone, that they are simply not on good terms anymore, and that he is not walking around losing sleep over whether that friendship ever gets stitched back together. That is a mature position. That is a position an adult with children and a fashion empire and a touring calendar takes. That is not a fighting position. So what changed? Because there is a canyon between I am not tripping about whether we are friends and I will meet you with no gloves on like this is 19th century Dublin. That is not an escalation. That is a teleportation. And that is precisely the question I want you to hold in your head for the next several minutes. Because I genuinely believe the answer is buried inside something A$AP Rocky already told us months ago, in a place almost everybody scrolled right past. Let me give you the wider frame first. Because context is what separates a gossip clip from an actual understanding of what you are watching. The man has been on tour. He has been in his bag on that stage, night after night, city after city, moving like a man who is enjoying the best professional stretch of his life. He has an album out in the world. He has a household that includes Rihanna and their children. He has a fashion operation that legitimately shapes what half the industry wears. By every visible metric, A$AP Rocky is winning comfortably. And winning men do not usually go looking for a street fight with another millionaire. Which is exactly why this registers so loudly. Now let us talk about the other side of the aisle, because Drake has been having a very particular kind of week himself, and I need you to understand the tone he set before Rocky ever opened his mouth in that interview chair. Drake has been out here running with a bar that has genuinely become the punchline of the season. Your baby mama did not even post your single. Where's she at? Where's she at? Where's she at? Honey, listen. I have watched a lot of shots get fired in this genre. I have watched men accuse each other of things that end careers. I have watched records that permanently altered public reputations. And I am telling you, with my whole chest, that measuring a man by whether the woman in his life reposted his music on her personal page is the strangest angle of attack I have ever witnessed from someone operating at that altitude. Since when is a partner's job description promoter? Since when is affection measured in reposts? There is a version of that complaint that makes sense, and it lives entirely in the world of the up and coming. When you are 22 and clawing for your first 10,000 streams, yes, you want the person beside you to share the link, because every share is oxygen. That is real. That is human. But when you are one of the most commercially dominant artists to ever exist, when your release schedule moves markets, when your name alone guarantees numbers before a single note plays, you do not need your household to function as an unpaid marketing department. It is lovely when they do it, especially if they were part of making it. Nobody is arguing against support. But out here, grown people are raising children, building businesses, managing families, handling actual life. Whether one person posted another person's single is somewhere around item 400 on the list of things that determine whether a relationship is healthy. And I would gently suggest that anybody who has never survived a real long-term partnership, the kind with mortgages and disagreements and Sunday afternoons, might not have the framework to understand why that entire line of attack lands so hollow with the audience. So that is the temperature. On one side, a man reducing a rival's private life to a repost. On the other side, ASAP Rocky, saying take the gloves off entirely, literally, and let us find out. But here is where I need to tell you the thing that reframes this whole conversation. And it goes back to something that has been bothering a specific portion of this audience since the moment that album arrived. Because when that project landed, there was a record on it that had a very specific portion of the listening audience sitting straight up in their chairs. And it was not the production. It was not the mixing. It was the posture. There is a song on there where the performer is describing hand signs. Multiple hand signs. Different signals, different sets, different affiliations, thrown up across the length of an entire track, paired with the assertion that him and his people are not rappers. Read that again. Not rappers. Meaning something else. Meaning something implied, something coded, something that carries a very particular weight if you grew up anywhere near the environments being referenced. And a large section of the audience simply let that slide. I did not. And I am going to explain exactly why, because this is not about policing anyone's art. This is about the strange double standard that governs who gets to perform danger and who gets audited for it. Here is the uncomfortable observation. You have one artist who has spent the better part of 2 decades constructing an image built primarily on charm, on melody, on being the most likable man in any room he enters. A man whose public record, going back to the very beginning, contains almost no instance of him personally initiating a physical confrontation with another human being. And I want to be extremely clear about something, because this is where people misread me every single time. That is not a criticism. Not initiating violence is not a character flaw. It is arguably the healthiest way a person can move through this world. And if more men in this industry operated that way, half the tragedies we cover would never have happened. But there is a difference between not living that life and performing that life for profit. And when you walk into the arena and start posturing at people who genuinely came from it, on a record, in a studio, with a mixing engineer and a lawyer and a security detail waiting outside, you have entered a conversation you did not earn the right to enter. And somehow that has been waved through as legitimate for years. Now flip the coin. The man on the other side of this? People genuinely forget. Because he shows up to every appearance immaculately dressed. Because he is a fixture at Fashion Week. Because the aesthetic is so refined that the biography gets erased underneath it. But if you actually know the story, and I mean the real one, not the magazine version, you know Harlem did not hand him a soft landing. He has spoken openly, repeatedly, about a childhood that moved between shelters. Not one shelter. Shelters. Plural. Instability as a permanent condition. He has talked about losing people early, about the kind of grief that arrives before a boy is old enough to process it. He has talked, at length and without dressing it up, about selling drugs. Not as a bar. As a biography. And here is the part people who did not come up in that environment never fully understand. In a place like Harlem, if you are a pretty boy, if you have a face and a sense of style and you refuse to blend in, you're going to fight. Not once. Constantly. Your appearance is a standing invitation. Every day you walk outside dressed better than the block, you are signing up for a confrontation, and you either learn to handle it or you learn to stay indoors. He learned to handle it. Which is why, if you actually audit the public record, you will find that this man has been in more documented physical altercations than very nearly any other celebrity of the last 20 years. In private, in public, domestically, overseas, across multiple continents. This is a person whose most internationally infamous legal situation, the one that involved a foreign government, a detention facility, diplomatic pressure, and a global news cycle, originated from a physical confrontation with a man who would not leave him alone on the street. That is the resume. That is the actual document. So when a man with that specific history says, on camera, without hedging, that he would meet somebody with bare knuckles like the Irish, that is not a bit. That is not a wrestling promo. That is a man telling you exactly what he is comfortable with. And the reason it lands so heavily is that everybody watching already knows the answer to whether he means it. Now, every single time I raise this point, a very predictable reply arrives in my comment section, and I want to address it directly, right now, before somebody types it again. Somebody is always going to say nobody cares about that street stuff. Nobody wants to hear this. That conversation is dead. Move on. Fine. Then let me offer the obvious counter. If nobody cares, tell him to stop. Tell him to stop rapping about it. Tell him to stop signaling it. Tell him to stop building marketing campaigns around an image he does not actually inhabit. If the subject is genuinely irrelevant to the culture, then it should be equally irrelevant when he performs it for revenue. You cannot demand that we ignore the topic and simultaneously allow one participant to profit from it. That is not a standard. That is a favor. And nobody is ever going to make that demand of him, which is precisely how I know the objection is not sincere. And that is why this bare knuckle line hits the way it does. It is not just a challenge. It is an audit. It is one man saying, in the plainest possible language, that the performance and the person have drifted too far apart, and he is prepared to close that gap physically. Now let me take you back, because there is a piece of tape that makes this whole thing snap into focus, and almost nobody has connected it to what happened this week. Remember the sit-down with Adin Ross. Remember when the boxing question got put to Drake directly, except the name on the other side of the ring was Kendrick Lamar. And remember the answer. Not a refusal. Not bravado. A condition. If it were to happen, it would have to be in a private gym. And genuinely, respect. I mean that without a drop of sarcasm. A private gym is the answer of a man who understands consequences, who does not want a fight turned into a spectacle, who does not want cameras monetizing his worst afternoon. That is a rational, self-protective, dignified position, and I have never mocked it. But do you remember the reporting cycle around that? Do you remember how it got packaged? For a stretch of weeks, that clip was circulated as evidence of aggression. He wants the smoke. He is ready. He called him out. That was the framing that traveled. And I came on this channel at the time, and I told you to slow down. I told you to listen to the actual construction of the sentence. He did not say line it up. He did not say name the date. He said if we did. If. Conditional. Hypothetical. That is the grammar of a man exploring an idea, not a man accepting a challenge. And again, that is completely fine. He is entitled to that. What he is not entitled to is switching modes when it is convenient. You do not get to be the private gym guy in one conversation and the where she at guy in the next. You do not get to demand decorum and privacy for your own confrontations while reducing another man's household to a punchline. Pick a posture and carry it through your entire life, consistently, in every direction. Because here is the mathematics of it, and this is the part that stings. And listen, I want to build the Drake side of this ledger properly, because it would be lazy of me to spend this entire breakdown on one man's biography without laying out the other man's with the same care. But the Drake story has always contained a tension, and that tension is the engine of everything happening this week. Because Drake did not come from the environment his music frequently references. Drake has been remarkably open about that at various points, and there was a stretch of his career where that honesty was actually his greatest strength. Early Drake was vulnerable. Early Drake talked about ambition and insecurity and wanting more. That was new. That was why it worked. Somewhere along the line, the posture hardened. Somewhere along the line, Drake started reaching for a register that the biography does not support, and the audience noticed. Not all of it, but enough of it. And the people who noticed have been asking the same question for years, which is simply, at what point does the performance become a costume? Now factor in the Rihanna chapter, because you cannot discuss Drake and A$AP Rocky without it. Drake's admiration for Rihanna was never private. Drake made it public, repeatedly, on award show stages, in records, in interviews, across years. That was Drake's own choice. Nobody outed him. He built that narrative himself, in front of millions of people, and the culture watched it unfold in real time like a serial drama. So when Rihanna built a family with someone else, the situation was always going to carry weight. Not because anyone owed Drake anything. She did not. But because Drake had constructed so much of his public identity around that longing that the resolution of it became a public event whether he wanted it to be or not. And now we arrive at where she at. A bar in which Drake, at the summit of his career, chose to measure another man's relationship by promotional output. Drake, who has spent 15 years being the most emotionally articulate man in the genre, reduced to a scoreboard about reposts. I keep returning to it because it genuinely reveals something. It tells you where the pressure point is. Then place the Adin Ross conversation beside it. Drake, asked about physically confronting Kendrick Lamar, offering a private gym as the terms. And I said it before, and I will say it again. That is a perfectly reasonable answer from a rational adult. But it is a different Drake than the one on the record. It is a different Drake than the one in the marketing. And the gap between those two versions of Drake is exactly the gap A$AP Rocky just drove a truck through. Because Rocky did not say private gym. He said bare knuckles like the Irish. No venue. No conditions. No tents. No hedge. That is the entire confrontation in one comparison, and Drake has to know that. Drake is far too media literate not to see how that contrast reads to the public. Which is why the most fascinating question of the next week is not whether Drake responds, but how. Because a diss record from Drake at this point does not resolve the contrast. It reinforces it. Drake responding on wax is Drake choosing the arena where he is strongest, and his opponent just told the world he is willing to go somewhere else entirely. There is genuinely no clean exit here for Drake. Silence looks like avoidance. A record looks like deflection. And a real response, the human kind, the kind where Drake actually addresses the friendship that died, would require a vulnerability that Drake has not publicly accessed in a very long time. The overwhelming majority of human beings walking this planet have never been humiliated in a nightclub by another man's hands. The overwhelming majority have never had the most degrading accusation imaginable turned into a chorus and played in stadiums. Those are rare experiences. Statistically, they are almost non-existent. Most people go from birth to death without either one ever touching them. He is both attached to his name. Both. And one of them he confirmed himself, in his own bars, in his own voice, on his own record, which means the conversation is no longer speculation. It is documentation. People hate hearing that. People find it distasteful. But being uncomfortable does not make a fact stop being a fact. And at a certain point, when you have volunteered that information into the public record yourself, you forfeit the right to be surprised when it becomes part of how you are measured. So no, I am not shocked that A$AP Rocky said what he said. I am shocked it took this long. Let me pull all the way back now, because I want you to understand the strategic architecture of what Rocky just did, and why it is genuinely one of the smartest moves anyone in this genre has made all year. Rocky did not release a diss record. Think about that. He had every opportunity. He has the studio, the budget, the audience, the producers, the moment. A diss record would have been the obvious play, and it would have been immediately absorbed into the content machine, chopped into 40,000 reaction videos, argued over for 6 days, and then buried by the next release cycle. That is what happens to diss records now. They are consumed and forgotten at industrial speed. Instead, he made it physical. Instead, he made it about bodies in a room. And in doing so, he moved the entire confrontation onto terrain where his opponent has, by his own stated preference, no interest in competing. That is not aggression. That is positioning. That is a chess player disguising a checkmate as a temper. And the second layer is even sharper. He did not deliver a monologue. He delivered a trailer. I am going to tell you the story. He gave the audience the promise of information and then withheld the information. He created an appointment. Every single person who watched that clip now has a date circled in their head, waiting for the full conversation to arrive, waiting to find out what version of history has been sitting in his chest for years. That is not a rapper doing press. That is a storyteller who understands that anticipation is worth more than confession. And what is he going to say? That is the question nobody can answer yet, and it is the reason this clip will not stop circulating. Because there are a few possibilities, and every single one of them is combustible. Possibility 1. He details exactly what happened during that lost pandemic stretch, the link-up that was supposed to occur and never did, the specific crossed wire that turned two cordial men into permanent strangers. That version is gossip gold, but relatively survivable. Possibility 2. He addresses the Rihanna dimension directly, on the record, with names and chronology, and confirms or dismantles years of speculation about how that triangle actually functioned. That version detonates. Possibility 3, and this is the one I would watch for. He uses the platform to make the same argument I just made to you, but to the man's audience rather than mine. He goes on that show and systematically dismantles the persona, not with insults, with receipts, with the biography, with the quiet, devastating precision of somebody who lived a life and watched it get costumed by a tourist. That third version does not end in a lawsuit. It ends in a permanent reputational adjustment. Now, before we move to the second story, I have to say something about the venue, because it has been eating at me since I saw the preview, and I know a portion of you have been thinking the exact same thing. Just imagine, for one moment, that your sitting city councilman hosts a podcast where he interviews rappers about whether they want to fistfight other rappers. Sit in that. Genuinely. Because that is not a hypothetical. Jason Lee, the man conducting this interview, holds elected office. He represents District 6 in Stockton, California. Actual constituents. Actual budget authority. Actual votes that determine how actual people live. And I want to be careful here, because I am not saying a person cannot have two careers. People contain multitudes. A councilman can be a media entrepreneur. That is allowed. What I am saying is that there is a specific kind of vertigo that comes from watching a man with municipal responsibilities conduct a segment about bare-knuckle boxing between millionaires. Because here is what a city councilman is supposed to be consumed by. Whether the water coming out of the tap is genuinely safe. Whether the lakes and waterways are clean. Whether the Parks and Recreation Department has what it needs so children have somewhere to go that is not a corner. Whether the municipal budget balances or whether the city is quietly sliding toward insolvency. Whether the roads are drivable. Whether the school zones are safe enough that a parent can exhale when the bus pulls away. That is the job. That is the entire job. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And you know the only moment I am willing to accept that a councilman is not thinking about those things? Vacation. That is it. And even then, be honest, if the phone rings while you are on that beach, you are answering it, because that is what you signed up for when you asked people to trust you with their city. So the notion that the same individual is sitting across from A$AP Rocky asking whether he would throw hands with Drake is, respectfully, a genuinely surreal artifact of the era we are living in. What dimension are we in? I do not have an answer. I just needed to say it out loud, because I know some of you were screaming it at your screen. Anyway, let us move, because the second story of the day is the one I actually think you should send to somebody you love. Because while everybody was busy arguing about who would win a fistfight, A$AP Rocky quietly conducted the most expensive business lesson of the year, and a man lost what may have been a life-altering opportunity in the time it takes to compose a social media post. Here's what happened. A$AP Rocky pulled an offer to work with a logo designer after that designer publicly shared Rocky's private message asking about logo revisions. Let me walk you through it slowly, because the details are everything. Rocky reaches out privately to a designer named Alan Peters. And I need you to hear the actual tone of the message, because the tone is the entire story. Good morning, Alan. How much do you charge for brand logo revisions? Assuming you would be willing to do so, I would be honored. Love your work. God bless. Read that again. Good morning. Not what up. Good morning. Full name. A direct, professional question about rates. Assuming you would be willing, which is a phrase that grants the other person the right to decline before they have even been asked. I would be honored, which places the designer above the celebrity in the hierarchy of the exchange. Love your work, which is specific admiration, not flattery. And God bless. That is not a celebrity throwing weight around. That is one of the most respectful cold approaches you will ever read from a person of that stature. There is no ego in that message anywhere. He is essentially saying, I respect your craft. You are under zero obligation to work with me. Tell me your number, and it would be a privilege. And understand what a revision request actually means in that world. A revision is not a from-scratch rebuild. A revision means the existing mark is being refined, touched up, adjusted, something added, something subtracted, proportions corrected, small refinements that make an established identity sharper. That is a defined, contained, professional engagement. Now, what should have happened next is the simplest transaction in business. Reply. Ask what the existing mark looks like. Ask what specifically needs adjusting. Ask about the deadline, because the deadline changes the price, always. Ask about scope. Provide a number. Sign something. Get paid. That is it. That is the entire sequence. For messages, maybe 5. Instead, the designer went straight to social media, reposted the private message publicly, and captioned it with the words, I have no words. Mind blown. No quote. No availability. No thank you. No, I am booked through spring, but here is a colleague who can help. Nothing that resembles a business reply. Just a public screenshot of a private inquiry, posted for applause. And A$AP Rocky responded exactly the way any professional would. This is just distasteful. Well, I guess we will not be working. Best of luck, buddy. Best of luck, buddy. Honey, that is the most surgical way to close a door I have ever read. There is no rage in it. There is no threat. There is no attempt to damage the man's reputation. It is 4 words of finality delivered with the emotional temperature of a man canceling a dinner reservation. And that is precisely what makes it devastating. He did not get loud. He simply left. Now let me say the part that I think matters more than any of the drama, because there are people watching this who are building something right now. And this is the lesson that could genuinely change your financial trajectory. Never put the cart in front of the horse. Secure the bag. Then talk about the bag. In that order. Always in that order. Because here is what actually got lost in that exchange, and it is so much bigger than one logo fee. Let us say the revision job pays $5,000, $10,000, whatever the number is. That number is not the opportunity. The number is the door. The opportunity is what stands behind the door. A$AP Rocky is not a client. He is an ecosystem. He is a fashion operation. He is a touring apparatus with merchandise. He is a man whose personal network includes the highest tier of the design world, the music world, and the luxury industry simultaneously. One satisfied engagement with him does not produce one invoice. It produces a referral pipeline that could feed a studio for a decade. And I am not even going to pretend the obvious thought did not occur to everybody watching. The man lives with Rihanna, a woman who operates multiple global brands. A woman whose companies require design work continuously, at volume, forever. Nobody is guaranteeing anything. But you cannot receive a referral from a relationship you detonated before it began. Opportunity does not always knock. Most of the time you have to go find it, chase it down, pitch it, get rejected, and pitch again. This one walked up to the door and knocked on its own. And instead of opening the door, he took a picture of the opportunity standing on his porch and broadcast the photograph to the internet, while the opportunity turned around and walked back down the driveway. That is the whole tragedy in one image. Now, I want to be fair here, because I do understand the human impulse. I do. When someone whose work you have admired for years appears in your messages, there is a genuine rush of validation that hits the nervous system. Your first instinct is to tell somebody. That is not villainous. That is human. But excitement is not a business strategy. And there is a professional discipline that separates people who convert opportunities from people who narrate them. The discipline is simple. Handle the transaction first. Celebrate second. Publish third, and only with permission. Because here is the other dimension that a lot of people are skipping past. Publishing a private inbound message without consent is not just impulsive. It is a breach of professional confidence. Every future potential client who saw that post now knows that reaching out to that designer carries a risk of ending up on someone's timeline. You did not just lose one client. You published a warning label about yourself. Everybody is different. I understand that. Some people would say the exposure from the post was worth more than the fee. Maybe for some it is. But exposure does not compound. Relationships compound. Referrals compound. A reputation for discretion compounds. A viral screenshot is a single payment that never pays again. So let this be the lesson for every entrepreneur, every freelancer, every designer, every writer, every producer, every person out here trying to build something with their hands and their talent. Secure the bag. Make sure it is closed. Make sure it has cleared. At the absolute minimum, get a quote out the door before you get a post out the door. Now let me connect these two stories, because they are not actually separate, and this is the part one have not seen anybody else articulate. Both of these situations are about the same thing. Both of them are about the gap between how a man is perceived and how a man actually operates. In story one, A$AP Rocky is confronting a persona that he believes does not match the person underneath it. In story two, he is on the receiving end of the same phenomenon in reverse. A stranger encountered the persona, the famous name, the cultural symbol, and reacted to the symbol instead of the human being who typed good morning and God bless. The designer did not respond to a client. He responded to a celebrity. And in doing so, he demonstrated exactly the kind of misreading that Rocky appears to be exhausted by. Both stories, one theme. Do not react to the image. Deal with the person. And that is what makes this particular week in the A$AP Rocky story genuinely interesting rather than just noisy. In the space of a few days, we watched him decline to perform a persona, and then watched him refuse to be reduced to one. Now let us talk about what actually happens next, because there are real consequences hanging over this, and I want you thinking about them before the full interview lands. First, there will be no fight. Let me just be an adult and say it. There is not going to be a bare-knuckle boxing match between these two men. The insurance alone makes it impossible. The legal exposure makes it impossible. The commercial obligations on both sides make it impossible. Nobody with that many contractual commitments is permitted to risk their own hands. But the fight was never the point. The point was the willingness. The point was that one man said yes without hesitating, and the other man's most recent public position on physical confrontation involved conditions, privacy, and a hypothetical tense. In the theater of public perception, that contrast is worth more than any actual fight would have been. Second, the full interview is going to be one of the most scrutinized conversations of the year. Every sentence is going to be extracted, captioned, slowed down, and analyzed. And that means he has enormous leverage and enormous risk simultaneously. If the story he tells is genuinely revelatory, he reshapes the narrative permanently. If it is vague, if it is a nothing burger, if it turns out that I am going to tell you the story means a rambling anecdote about a missed phone call in 2020, then this preview will be remembered as the greatest bait and switch of the season, and the backlash will be brutal. He has raised the bar to a height that demands delivery. Third, and this is the one nobody is discussing. What does Rihanna think about all of this? Because whatever version of the story he tells, it necessarily involves her, and she is a person, not a plot device. The framing of "you took that girl" is a phrase that treats a woman as territory, and I would be doing this audience a disservice if I did not point out that the woman at the center of this narrative has never once participated in it. She has not commented. She has not fed it. She has, by every available indication, simply lived her life and built her companies while grown men constructed a decade of tension around her name. The most powerful person in this entire triangle is the one who has said the least. Now let me bring it home. I opened by telling you that A$AP Rocky offered to settle this with his bare hands, and that the reason it landed so hard is that everybody watching already believed he meant it. And I stand by that completely. But after walking through all of it, I think the bare knuckle line is actually the least interesting thing that happened. The most interesting thing is I am going to tell you the story, because that is a man announcing that the public version of the last several years is incomplete. That is a man saying there is a chapter you were never given. And whatever is inside that chapter is now the single most anticipated piece of information in the culture. We have days to wait. Days. So tell me what you actually think, because I want to hear it. Do you believe Rocky genuinely wants that confrontation? Or is this the most calculated piece of narrative positioning we have seen all year? Do you think Drake responds at all? Or does he let it evaporate the way he has let other things evaporate? And be honest with me about the designer, because I know some of you disagree with me completely. Was he wrong to post it? Or was the exposure worth more than the check? Drop it below. Be specific. Be brutal if you have to be. I read them. And if this is your first time landing here, subscribe before you go, because when that full conversation drops in a matter of days, we are breaking down every second of it, line by line, and you're going to want to be in the room when we do. I will see you on the next one.